Good evening, everyone. Howdy. Welcome to Open Forum. Who's here for the first time? Okay, awesome. Very good. So I'm Dr. Hunter Peterson. I'm the clinic director of Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. So we are just right downtown, a few blocks, and I do this forum once a month. It's every Wednesday, first week of the month at 6:30 here in this room. And it is an opportunity to dialogue about all things health, and truly it is a dialogue, so I really want this to be a conversation. Raise your hand, interrupt me, let's go off on a tangent. I did come prepared to talk about a specific topic tonight, and we'll discuss that at length. But it's also an opportunity to talk about all things health. So, I am going to be recording this, that's why the camera's here, so if you want to go back and catch some things, if you want to share it with a friend, it's going to be posted to our website in the next 1 to 2 weeks, and that's just cdahealingarts.com. So go check it out. There's lots of information on our website too about what we're all about. And there's also a little sign-up sheet in the back if any of you want to learn about the events we do at the clinic. We are doing a detox right now, we do community events, we do different types of lecture series, so a lot to kind of learn about if you want to sign on to that. And what else? So, as I said, I want to make sure we all have an opportunity to bring all of our health questions forward. So what I'd like to do is take a minute to hear what kind of questions you guys have, write them down on our little whiteboard, and at the end of the talk that I'm going to give, revisit those questions towards the end of our hour. So who wants to start us off? First question. Any sort of health question of any type?
What do you do for high blood pressure?
Treating high blood pressure? Sure. Can write that down. We'll touch base on that.
Similar vein than pre-diabetic sugar, higher blood sugar than you want. Not diabetic, but
yeah,
pre.
Yeah.
In the same vein. Blood sugar.
Yeah. They're related for sure. I'm also going to just write cause plus treatment because they're kind of one and the same in many ways. And then,
How to identify the cause of a runny nose after every big meal.
oh, yeah.
You are not alone.
What other questions are there? Anybody else? Yep.
How prevalent is irritable bowel syndrome in today's population in America? And is there, the medical profession seems to have no handle on it whatsoever. What is causing this for everybody?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Love to answer that.
Yeah, and in that vein, a diet, where you're probably going to touch on this, healthy diet for reflux.
Sure. So I'll just say reflux, which is also called heartburn. I'm going to also write cause and treatment, especially diet. Good one. Okay. Yeah.
How about for acne?
In terms of just
Nutrition?
nutrition and treatment, yeah.
Maybe you'll cover that in the talk.
Yeah. No, totally. And we'll see a lot of overlap between some of these things, but absolutely. Yeah, in the very back.
I'm interested in diets for individuals with food sensitivities and allergies. I have a teenage daughter that is down in just a few food groups. What I can feed her.
Yeah. So So kind of getting some strategies of, potential
Yeah, 'cause
options.
I've kind of done it all. I've done everything from allergy shots to acupuncture to rotation diets, and struggling to find the right thing.
Sure. Yeah, and if we get at the very end when we get to that, I might have to ask you a few more questions. I have to caveat any of my answers with ultimately it really needs to be personalized. Just based on what's going on with her, it sounds like a pretty complex case, but I can certainly point you in some directions of starting points.
Perfect.
Yeah. So restricted diets. Yes.
Painful joints.
So arthritis? Yeah. And when you say painful joints, it's multiple, many? Yeah,
It's like
achy.
all
Okay.
at once.
Yeah, okay. Okay. What else? Any other topics, questions? Okay. This is a good place to start. So we'll come back around to this, and when I get done chatting about our topic tonight, hopefully not too late, then we'll move through those, and anyone who wants to stay can, and those who want to scoot can as well. All right, so tonight I felt like, as spring shows up and we're kind of getting into gardening weather and just fresh kind of food season, so to speak, I wanted to do a real nutrition, food as medicine based conversation topic. And so what I wanted to focus on today is, we all seek on some level to eat healthy. Defining what healthy is one point I think that's really important to wrap our heads around. And I'm going to try to preface things by really working through that with you guys and how I would define that. But once we know we want to eat healthy, we're all kind of, stuck in this bit of a predicament where we have busy lives. A lot of obligations, a lot of commitments, a lot going on, and, we don't have our entire day like our ancestors did, where it was like, find your food, cook your food, find your food, cook your food. I mean, that's kind of how human species evolved up until relatively recently in the past few hundred years. And so now with all this stuff going on in our lives, how do we eat healthy and make it practical in a busy life where we have things we can go to that are quick and easy but nutritious? So, and I want to kind of encompass that too around the whole process of eating, right? Not just the preparation of food, but the shopping for food and the storage of food and how to navigate that around, some of the specific structures that we kind of run up against on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of the centerpiece of this topic that I'm going to talk about. Is there anything deeper beyond that people are hoping to learn or get out of this that I can help have a little guidance that can really point us in a more specific direction? Yeah.
Eating out.
Eating out. Okay, that's a good one to add. I didn't think of doing that, but I'd love to add that in. Great. For sure. Yes.
Just healthy, quick snacks for children or teens.
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole family, really, but
Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the things I want to chat through. Okay, so what's that?
Just, I have a friend who has a policy of never eating past 8 o'clock
Yeah.
p.m. So on that kind of an idea, busy, you don't, you're run, you just at some point cut it off and say, sorry, I'm going to be hungry tonight, I'll get up in the morning and do something, or, how do you address those kind of nights?
Well, it's kind of a mind over matter thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. Eating within a couple of hours of going to bed, really ideally 3 hours of going to bed, is not a great thing. It puts a lot of work on our gut. in the time where our body's supposed to be reallocating all of its energy to restoration and rest. And so, yeah, but when you're hungry, you know, our instinct is to say hunger is bad and we need to eat. Whereas, truly, our physiology and our species is incredibly well designed to fast for multiple days on end. In fact, I'm doing a fast with a group right now. We're doing it for 5 days. We're doing it with juices, so it's not calorie-free. But what it really comes down to, yeah, it's kind of a mind over matter thing. And only through experience can we learn that we can forego food with very little consequence, in fact, benefit to our health. So I would argue that your best move, if you get home really late and it's within an hour or so of your bedtime, would be to get a nice hot cup of tea going and go get your book out and do your nighttime ritual and just, you know, practice changing your awareness away from your stomach or whatever your mind's telling you your stomach's telling you. Ideally. Easier said than done, but again, with practice, it can be done. Yeah. Okay, so basically, let's start with the process of eating healthy by first kind of, you know, putting some caveats in place of what defines a healthy diet, right? Because really, we have to answer that question in order to talk about what we're going to be cooking. So the first point I want to make is that I make an assumption here that a healthy diet is a whole foods diet. And let me break down the meaning of that. By whole foods, what I mean is that anything that you eat, when you look at the foods you're eating, you can tell the plant that it came from, or the animal, right? So most things that are in a package, most things that are in a box, most things that are in a bag, they're not whole foods, right? They are processed in some way. Another way to put it is, if you have to read a label on your food, it's not a whole food. Right? So people talk about, oh, you should really read labels. Well, in the best world, you don't even need to read labels because you're eating whole foods. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is going to be derived from whole food nutrition, which creates a challenge, right? Because what's the great thing about processed food? They're processed, they're already made, you don't have to cook them, you don't have to do anything with them, you just put your hand in the box and you start eating it, right? And that's, yes, very convenient, but what you lose when you process a food is a profound amount of the nutritional value. The fibers are stripped, fiber is a big deal in our diet. A lot of the vitamins and minerals are stripped. A lot of the plant constituents that actually provide such a large part of nutrition are totally gone in that process of manufacturing the food. And that's why I really call processed foods, the better term for them are food-like substances. I mean, they're not really food in my book. I mean, that being said, probably the typical American diet is over 50% at best really processed food. So we're talking about a lot of it in our regular diets, and I want to make this class about how do we get away from processed food in a reasonable, on-the-go way in life. Another kind of point I want to make is that the foods I will be talking about tonight de-emphasize dairy. And the reason they do that is because I'm a pretty strong believer that generally the main milk that humans are supposed to drink are the milk from humans when they're very young, and that's mainly it. Specifically, I find the vast majority of my patients to have a sensitivity to cow's milk. And most predominantly, almost all of our dairy products are derived from cow's milk. Goat and sheep is a little bit different story, and I'm going to mention a couple of goat and sheep things in the context of our conversation. But generally, I'm going to be very much de-emphasizing dairy as one of the central food groups that we're including in our meal recipes, snack recipes, etc. Okay. I also, in kind of this conversation, am going to really be promoting a very low glycemic approach to the foods we'll be talking about. What I mean by low glycemic is low starch and low sugar content. But the word glycemic involves a really important factor, which is fiber. So the glycemic load of something is how quickly a carbohydrate absorbs into your bloodstream. And it turns out the amount of fiber contained in that food has a lot to do with that rate. So an example is white rice versus brown rice. Brown rice has 10 times as much fiber as white rice. The white rice absorbs into your system 3 or 4 times as quickly as brown rice. Therefore, the glucose levels in your bloodstream skyrocket upward much faster. Processed foods also happen to have a really high glycemic index. Part of the reason we're de-emphasizing them. And part of the reason I want to really talk about this is this question that was asked, pre-diabetes. 1 out of 2 adult Americans has at least early stage, what I call insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. 1 out of 2. 1 out of 6 has diabetes, type 2. So we're talking about 50 or 80 million Americans have pre-diabetes or diabetes, and about 30 million have diabetes, right? This is an epidemic. And every single day in my office, when I look at people's lab results, when I check their blood sugar, I'm seeing some degree of this going on in a large majority of my patients. So any sort of healthy diet I'm going to talk about is going to go more toward our ancestral diet, which is very low glycemic in nature. And so when I say low glycemic, what do I really mean? I mean added sugars, whether that be in a liquid or a food form. I mean processed foods. And I mean grains, generally speaking, overall. So I'll talk about a little bit with grains here, but not a lot. Because I think we eat too many of them, generally, and it leads to a lot of the other issues that we're kind of talking about here. Especially certain grains like wheat and potato and corn. And all the derivative products that contain those. Okay, so that's another little caveat in how we're going to approach this. I would say another one that kind of goes hand in hand with that is a huge emphasis is going to be placed on vegetables. Okay, again, I turn to nature and our ancestral diet, which was about 80% fibrous vegetables. And the word fibrous should be used too, because we're talking about non-starchy veggies, right? Potato and corn, I don't include those in this conversation, right? They're really grains disguised as vegetables. So most of the recipes we'll be talking through, or the concepts, are really going to heighten the need for fibrous vegetables in all their different preparation forms, to the tune of ideally focusing our meals in at around 60 to 70% fibrous vegetables, right? And again, that term fiber, super important. The typical American consumes about 10 grams of fiber a day. Our design runs most efficiently off of 40 to 50 grams of fiber a day. Okay, that's dramatic in terms of how undercutting we are the need for fiber, which has a vital role to play in our intestinal health, as well as the health of our microbiome, all the bugs that live there. And so our most plentiful source of fiber is vegetables. And so there's going to be a major emphasis there. Additionally, I will be de-emphasizing the use of animal protein and meat, particularly meat, and particularly pork and red meat. So you won't hear me talk much about those. Not saying they're bad things, especially when they are raised appropriately, meaning grass-fed, organic, really clean sources. And that's a big point to make about meat, is that of all the things, if you want to spend money on shopping, it's way more important to spend your money on your meat and animal products than it is even on vegetables and other things, because meat essentially is created by concentrating everything up the food chain. So all the toxins in the lower levels of the food chain are concentrated times an order of a magnitude times 10 into meat. So we got our hormones, our pesticides, our heavy metals, all of our toxic compounds, way more concentrated in the animal products versus plant products. Okay. Any questions so far about kind of that overview. Okay. So, let's start in with the shopping part. First of all, I like to really break this down into an analysis of, ideally shopping is time, right? So we want to shop as seldom as possible. Now, it depends on which store you're in, but if you're in a Costco, it's a lot different than in a typical grocery store, or Pilgrim's is different than a typical grocery store, but the typical grocery store, at least, generally, you basically don't really want to spend any time in the middle of it. Amazingly, about 90% of the grocery store is processed foods. It's shocking, but it's true. So the edges where the produce is, on the other edges where the eggs and the meat are, and those types of things, and maybe the bulk section, if the store has a bulk section, that's where you want to spend all your time. It should be hardly ever that you dip into those middle aisles, and that's only because you don't want to take the time to really prepare like a condiment from scratch, which I'm going to argue is pretty easy to do, and we'll talk about that. But, so in a store, that's where we want to be doing our shopping. And generally speaking, I'm going to kind of break down into what you get monthly versus what you get weekly, versus what you get, every 6 months or something. So when you're doing things monthly, the bulk section is a great place to kind of visit once a month, right? This is where you have all your beans. This is where you have, nuts and seeds. This is where you have your grains or your healthy whole grains. This is potentially where you get your spices, where you get sweeteners like honey. You can actually even get olive oil in the bulk section. There's a lot you can get there. And I mentioned beans, and I make a point here that we like eating canned beans, and that's all well and good, but canned bean is processed food. They inject compounds to preserve those beans. They also inject sugar oftentimes in there, and they are in BPA-lined cans, which are plastics. So you'd be way better off buying your beans dry. If you're going to use those beans, soaking them overnight or 24 hours, or even better, invest in a piece of equipment called a pressure cooker, and then any bean you ever want to cook is done from hard dry to cooked in about 45 minutes. And by the way, you knock off all of the irritating compounds on those beans, all the lectins and stuff, by cooking them in the pressure cooker.
Would you soak it beforehand?
You don't need to. No, they'll
Not
just
the
burn
pressure.
right through them. Yep. And then soak them a couple of times after you cook them. So a pressure cooker, and I'm going to talk about cooking supplies too, but I'll just mention it right now. The Instapot is the really great one that's all mechanized with digitized. Really great investment. It's like $120, $150, but man, what a great tool. So that's a really good way to prepare your beans. Yeah.
In the book Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, she does not recommend pressure cookers because she thinks that they change the proteins, the nature of the proteins in the high pressure and high heat. So do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of contrasting viewpoints, right? Like another thing that you could argue that's good about the pressure cooker is it knocks all the lectins out of the beans, which a lot of people have gut and immune sensitivities to. I think the pressure cooker does change the structure of the compounds to some degree, but the nutritional content of cooking it, I think, is minimally displaced. That's my personal opinion about it.
Cooking anything changes the composition of
Yeah,
anything.
that's right.
Everything.
That's right.
I mean, I don't see the point of that comment. It changes everything, cooking.
Right.
It doesn't have to be pressure cooker.
That's correct. I mean, everything changes. What she's saying is that it basically denatures the proteins in a different manner than if you just cooked it on the stove by using the pressure cooker, which is a different method of cooking at lower temperatures but higher pressure.
So I've used Nourishing Traditions for years, and I've soaked my beans for 48 hours to try to get rid of the gas after you eat the beans. And then I've been using the Instapot, and I don't get the gas. Nothing. It's gone.
Yeah.
You bring it, heat it up, and then soak it before you go?
No, in the Instant Pot, you just cook
Yeah,
it
you just
dry.
cook it and then
Put
you
the
use
water
it.
in, didn't
Yeah.
you?
Yep.
But before that, did you soak it before you?
Oh,
go?
yes, yes.
Because see, I got our wood cook stove, and I just put the water and the beans and let it cook,
And you're welcome to do that.
But
My
I'm always
point is,
feel guilty about
yeah.
it, and I needed to soak it. I thought, I don't have time to soak.
right,
They're
and
cooking all
and
day long,
again,
or whenever they're done, they're done.
yeah, the theme of this lecture is eating on the go, right? So we want to find convenient ways, and my point I'm making is a pressure cooker is a great investment when you want to prepare beans healthily and remove the compounds that irritate most people, and do it quick. And the other thing I love pressure cookers for is preparing bone broths, right? So one of the main meals I'm going to talk about is soups and how to make a really good soup. Well, the base of a good soup is a bone broth, right? It's taking the joints, taking the bones, taking the skin of a turkey, a chicken, beef bones, a piece of lamb, and you stick all those materials in a pressure cooker, and you have a rich bone broth in about 3 hours. And then you can actually siphon off your broth, put all that stuff back in, and make a second broth out of them. And so really in one day, rather than smelling up your kitchen for multiple days on end, 6 hours you can have 2 amazing giant stocks of bone broth, 2/3 of which you chuck in your freezer, and now you have, potentially 3 or 4 soups worth of broth lined up, ready to go. So it's another just great way to use a pressure cooker, which people are so daunted by making bone broths, and oh my gosh, that's so hard, and they go spend a ton of money to buy an inferior quality product, when really, it's not too hard to make them. You just need the bones, water, a little splash of vinegar, salt, pepper, garlic, a couple spices, and then you can make a delicious broth. And the pressure cooker, again, is a great tool for that.
For the bone broth, do you
Yeah.
use, I pour mine through cheesecloth, and strain out the little bits of things and stuff. Do you keep the fat? Because
Well, generally speaking, yes. However, some people with really deficient digestion who can't handle a lot of fat while they're healing their gut, it's sometimes better to strain it. And different meats have a lot different fat, right? So beef has tremendously larger amount of fat than chicken and turkey. So if you're making poultry broths, there's way less fat in them to begin with. Okay, so sorry, I got a little off track. Back to your monthly shopping. So I think of all those bulk things. I think of your proteins, except your fresh meats, but freezing meat does not devitalize it too much. So if you're going to get a big set of lamb chops, if you're going to get a big set of ground turkey, I feel like meat does not compromise its quality if you buy it and then freeze it, with the exception maybe a little bit of fish. Fish usually is not quite as good once it's been frozen. If you truly get it fresh, which is kind of hard to really get it fresh here inland, so it's probably already been frozen. But generally speaking, that's a good thing that you don't need to get every single week unless you want to really eat it fresh. I would also argue your fats. This is your liquid fats that you get on the shelves, your extra virgin olive oil, your butter, clarified butter, your nuts and seeds. As long as your nuts and seeds are being stored in an airtight container in the fridge, they're not going to go rancid, and they can last at least 1 to 2 months. Same story with your olive oil. I'd really make sure to consume that within 2 months of opening it, because of the ability for it to go rancid.
Those nuts and seeds can go in the freezer.
They can
Be
also.
fine forever.
They can also go in the freezer, you're right. So another piece of equipment to invest in, a deep freeze, right? I think they're like $80, $90 at Costco, so as long as you have the space for it, they're super energy efficient, and you can get a lot of stuff in there. When salmon are in season, you can stock up, and when turkeys are in season, so yeah, there's a lot of value to having a deep freeze for that extra storage of preserving things so that you can cut down on your shopping time and have a lot of diversity available. weekly kind of things. So produce, of course, is definitely a weekly thing, right? Generally speaking, most produce needs to be bought within the week it is consumed. And every day that a piece of produce sits in your fridge, you lose some of the nutrient value. Not profoundly, and certain foods are different than others, and I've done a whole lecture on storage of food and preparation of food and what it does nutritionally. That's a little beyond our scope, but every food's a little different. So ideally, your greens, and especially your greens, your leafy things should be consumed within about 5 days of purchasing, maximum. Your above ground vegetables, meaning things that flower, come up out of the ground, should ideally be consumed within around 7 days. And then your root vegetables, you can kind of get away with a lot longer there. So above ground would be things like zucchini and broccoli and cauliflower and green onion and cucumber, right? Root vegetables would be things like beets and carrots and onion, right? Those things, we actually have even a longer shelf life. We could go about 2 weeks with them. So that's kind of, from a storage standpoint, you can estimate that at the very most, you might, if you were really being efficient, you would really only have to go to the store once a week because you really need to replenish your greens and your veggies, at least on a weekly basis. Of course, there is the possibility of frozen and canned. If you had to do one or the other, I would prefer frozen. It's more vital than canned. And there's nothing wrong with frozen, it's just that, again, it's been devitalized to a degree that freezing of the vegetable, you've lost a significant portion of those plant nutrients when you do that. So I'm kind of making the assumption here that we're all trying to actually prepare fresh foods for these easy, healthy meals.
So if you have a fresh carrots,
Yeah.
and you cut them and freeze them, then you're gonna lose this lots of vitamins, that's what you're saying?
Not lots, some. Not lots. I think, as I said, I would way rather have my patients eating vegetables in whatever form, frozen preferable to canned, than not at all. So if it's a matter of this is what I can pull off and that's what I have the bandwidth for, then yeah, freeze them. Or buy them frozen already. Yeah. But ideally it's fresh. And so on a weekly basis, we're picking up our fresh veggies. I would say similarly with fruit, about a week. If you refrigerate your fruit, you can probably stretch it to 2 weeks. Avocados, which is a fruit, usually, they got to ripen and they go for maybe 7 days, and you can keep them in the fridge for a little longer. But you're kind of in that same window with your fruit too. Your eggs, your dairy, those can again last a little longer, maybe a couple weeks. So I think that kind of covers how we shop. Is there any question around that or anything I left out that you guys want to flag for me? Okay. Great. So stocking the kitchen. What do you need to have around really to do this well in terms of all the recipes and ideas we're going to talk about? So there are 2 a little bit pricier items I think that are really valuable investments. The first is a food processor. Does everyone know what a food processor is? Does anyone need me to help explain that a little more? Right, the thing that you can either kind of blend things up really, really finely or chop things depending on which blade you put on. Food processors are great tools to have. A Cuisinart will run you around $100 maybe. If a really nice one, maybe $150. So this tool can save you a ton of time and can give you a lot of access to really healthy food with relatively short prep times. The other tool is a really high quality blender with a good motor in it. Now kind of the top of the line stuff is a Vitamix. A good model of Vitamix might set you back around $500, so that's a big investment. That's an industrial grade blender. But I think even the Ninjas and these other kind of lower grade blenders with pretty decent motors in them will do just fine for the things we're going to talk about. But blenders do a few things really, really well, and so it's really good to have a good one around. Of course, pots and pans, really critical if we're going to be cooking. Point to make there, aluminum and Teflon, I would really advise steering clear of those surfaces. Aluminum is a heavy toxic metal in the body. We don't want to put aluminum on our food. And we don't want to put Teflon, which is a neurotoxin that inevitably comes off our pans onto our food. So non-stick pans are fun and convenient. They're not so good for your body. So ideally, we're doing stainless steel as our main cooking pots and pans, or a good cast iron skillet that's properly seasoned and maintained. Okay, so we definitely need an array of those things. And a really big pot would be nice so that we can make our big soups. And when we make our big soups, store a bunch of them in the freezer, because those are one thing that freezes and keeps really, really well. So having a big stainless steel pot, investing in that, especially with big families, super great investment to make. So a couple of other things, just real basic. I mean, of course you need knives and you need measuring spoons and the basic stuff of a kitchen. I also think some various storage containers, investing in some glass storage containers of various sizes, from really big sizes where you can actually stick stuff in the freezer, or mason jars. Giant mason jars are a great way to store stuff in the freezer, but also just various size glass Tupperware, basically, so that, again, one of the ways we save time with cooking is to invest a little time in cooking, overcooking something just for the meal at hand, so that we have leftovers. So a real basic concept is, yeah, leftovers are one of the principal ways in a busy society and life that we can eat healthy without being in the kitchen all the time. So having a wide array of those glass. And why glass? Because the plastics, again, are going to push toxins into our foods that we don't really want to have there.
So what about the BPA-free plastics?
There's still other toxins in plastics. So in an ideal world, we're using glass if we can. But BPA-free is superior to BPA plastics.
I kind of chuckle when I hear the commercials about, some of these meals that can come to your home and your leftovers. I love leftovers. And,
Yeah.
I make extra quinoa, I put extra
Yeah.
beans. And
Yeah, and I guess I should make that a disclaimer here, that if you hate leftovers, then some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about may not be that helpful. But I really think that, practically speaking, I can personally attest, the last time I made a lunch, I work 5 days a week, was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago on a work day. So, that's the degree to which I think leftovers are important in eating healthy, because it's so easy to have it in a container, grab it from the fridge, or go with it, and then do it during the day without having to prepare it. Okay. So a little bit of kitchen stocking in terms of the house, things you should just have around, right? Spices, salt, and pepper. These are pretty important, right? We're not going to put processed food or processed condiments onto these foods we're making. So we got to give them some flavor. We got to get them tasting well. Salt can go a tremendous way on its own, but so can spices, right? And we're talking about all sorts. Garlic is a key one. Ginger is a key one. Those both can be done fresh, which is preferable, but you can also get them in powdered form. You can get chili powder. You can use cumin. You can use curry. You can use paprika. You can use all of the leafy spices like rosemary and oregano and thyme. These are just to name a few, but everyone should have a good spice rack in their kitchen, because it really, spice is the kind of way that we get some variety in our food, because we're eating a lot of vegetables, right? We don't all want them to taste the same. So spice is definitely important. As the main sweetener, I'm really going to advocate, if we're using sweeteners, is local honey. The thing about honey is it's still sugar, but it contains all sorts of immune-boosting nutrients and anti-allergy compounds in it. So local honey is a really good sweetener if you're going to use some type of sweetener. Apple cider vinegar. Vinegar can be a really good thing. Salad dressings, a little splash into a sauté, bone broth we mentioned, different types of condiments you make on your own. Vinegar is a really good thing to have around. Apple cider being probably the highest quality.
Something that I'm going to just pass on, I never peel ginger, fresh ginger root.
Yeah.
You just scrub it and grate it or chop it or put it in, in your breakfast drink, whatever, but you don't have to peel it. Just use it.
Yeah. And again, that's a palate thing, like you definitely, there's a little more roughage to it, but yeah, it's definitely great raw too. Okay, a couple more things to have around. Wheat-free tamari sauce, or liquid aminos. Bragg's is the company that makes these. This is a great agent to flavor food. It is basically like soy sauce, but a little healthier. It's wheat-free. And I find that it's very good in stir fries, in all sorts of dips. So again, a just nice thing to have in the kitchen. And herbal teas, of course, that's beverages, but really good to have those in stock. Oils, extra virgin olive oil, we mentioned how long it keeps for, so don't get these giant containers from Costco that you're gonna use over a year, right? That's all rancid after a couple months. So reasonable sized containers that you can get through. And my other favorite cooking oil is clarified butter. Clarified butter, or ghee, is butter that has extracted the milk solids off of it. It's incredibly stable at high heats, and because it's saturated. So it's great for any type of high heat cooking. You can buy it in health food stores, or you can make it on your own really quickly. Process is very simple. Grab a unsalted organic butter, grass-fed butter ideally, like a pound of it, put it in a pot, simmer it for about 45 minutes. You'll see all the milk solids separate out, skim them off the top, pour out the clear liquid and make sure the stuff on the bottom doesn't get into your clear liquid, and then cover it, screw a cap on it, and you have a wonderful fat that you can use essentially for all sorts of high heat cooking. So anytime we talk about preparing vegetables, veggies don't have a lot of calories in them, right? So the key is anytime you consume veggies, you want to combine it with a fat. So if you're cooking the veggies, you want to have a generous amount of ghee in there. If you're eating raw, like a lot of salads, you want to put a lot of extra virgin olive oil as the base of your salad dressing. So there's this big fat demonization that is starting to change in our knowledge and perception now, but I'm a huge fan of healthy fats, and these are my two favorite oils. It should be a definite ingredient you have always in your kitchen. A few cooking supplies, baking soda, baking powder, a little bit of vanilla. I mean, these are good things generally to have, but those are kind of some of the basics in terms of just kitchen supplies.
Vanilla is getting to be pretty pricey.
Yep. Well, a little vanilla goes a long ways.
But you can make your own vanilla.
Yeah.
All you do is get the beans and a little bit of vodka.
Yeah. Oh, I know you can make it, yeah. And again, it's like, we could go so far into this, right? Like, I love to talk about great mayonnaise recipe, great tahini recipe, great aioli recipe, great ketchup recipe, great salsa recipe. I mean, I wish we had the time. I'm just going to try to cut back there. Although those are all really makeable things. But again, the way you have to think about it is the time you make it initially, it might take you 20, 25 minutes to make your mayonnaise. But guess what? You can make a jar this big of real mayonnaise that's olive oil based, that tastes really delicious, and have that lying around your fridge for the next 3 or 4 months, right? So if you go look in the store, even here, it's very hard pressed to find an olive oil based mayonnaise. They're all soybean oil, and they've got all sorts of preservatives in them. And so, yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend taking the time to create your own condiments. And again, there's all sorts of recipes online. one of the things I want to point out that we won't go into detail, I'm not going to talk through a ton of concrete recipes with you guys. It's going to be broader strokes. But the internet is a wonderful thing, right? You don't have to pay now to get literally 50 ways to make mayonnaise at home, right? Pinterest, the website Pinterest is amazing for that. I mean, you can literally come up with dozens of recipes and utilize that as your backdrop. There's great cookbooks I could, recommend to people, but honestly, the internet is such a great resource now. Okay.
Question on olive oil, does that have to be kept in the fridge?
No. In fact, it'll kind of solidify in the fridge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's more about just consuming it upon breaking the seal of it within a couple months before any rancidification happens.
So when you make your own salad dressings, any tip on that?
Yeah, that's going to be one of my topics. Yeah, I want to talk through that.
So if you keep it in the fridge, you should be able to keep it a lot longer. It's solid.
Yeah, but then it's solid, and how do you use it? Because you're using the olive oil, not cooking with it. You want to pour it onto fresh things.
I guess I'm usually thinking flaxseed oil and salad and olive oil for cooking or ghee, so it's solid, you take out
Yeah.
all.
I generally wouldn't recommend a lot of cooking with olive oil. It's pretty fragile still, even with low heat cooking, like under 200 maybe, but otherwise no.
What about avocado oil?
Avocado oil is a higher cooking oil. You could do higher cooking, but some people are more sensitive to avocados, and I just generally find olive oil to have greater health benefits than other oils overall. Yeah, I mean, more so than avocado oil.
So if you're cooking, you would use ghee.
Clarified butter, yep. Ghee. And there's coconut oil too. I mean, overall, coconut oil is a relatively healthy fat. It's just that a lot of people, in my opinion, are sensitive to coconut. And so it's not one of my favorites to advocate. But I'm not saying you should never use coconut. And of all coconut products, the oil is probably the most benign. And the MCT oil is even more pure because it's purified. So it's a totally, reasonable one to use. Okay. Any questions about the stocking the pantry, shopping, all those pieces? Okay. So what I want to do in talking about the nitty-gritty details of these quick recipes that are healthy is I kind of want to go through a day. I just figure when I talk with my patients and I want to know how they eat, I want to know what a typical day is like. And so some of you may be good with your breakfast, others maybe, I don't know what to eat for breakfast. So I'm just going to go through a day and give you concepts of what I would work on. So let's start with breakfast. First thing is steel cut oats. I know I didn't talk about doing a lot of grains, but one of the healthiest grains, I believe, is steel cut oats. Steel cut means that they are prepared in a fashion that hasn't processed them. They're not instant, which means if you make them from dry, you have to cook them for like 30 minutes until they're really ready. A really convenient way around it, take your oats for the next day, put them in the pot with a lid on it the night before. You wake up and you have to cook them for maybe 3 or 4 minutes and they're ready. So you can do steel cut oats really, really fast. It's basically instant oats with all the health benefits of whole oats.
You're just soaking them overnight.
Soak them overnight in water.
Not cooking them, just
Not
soaking
cooking them, just soaking them. Yep, that's all. You cook them in the morning, get your steel cut oats, but then you got to doctor it up, right? Those oats are fiber, nutrients, and carbohydrates. So we are missing protein and fat from that meal. This is, again, a great place where the taste of clarified butter is one of the best things ever. A big glob of clarified butter in your steel cut oats is amazing. Right? You don't need to put cream on it. Clarified butter tastes great in steel cut oats. If you want a sweetening element to that, cinnamon is a great spice to put on it. It's wonderful. It actually lowers blood sugar. And then adding whole fruit if you really want to sweeten that, which has all the fiber and the plant nutrients contained in it. Berries particularly would be my go-to there. Then to get your protein into it, either nut butters or nuts and seeds, right? You can do all sorts. You can do sunflower, pumpkin, walnut, almond, peanut. I mean, any nut and seed pretty much is a really healthy food as long as they're consumed in moderate quantities. So that would be a really more savory, kind of hot breakfast you can do. The other kind of hot breakfast food I'm going to mention is eggs, because there's so many great ways to healthily prepare them. I will make a point that I believe the best way to prepare eggs is to cook them and scramble them as little as possible. So your most superior way to prepare eggs is either over easy on really, really low heat, covering them with the lid, in a lot of healthy base of ghee, or poaching them, which you can just do right in water. You can drop the egg into water with a little vinegar in it. You don't have to have a fancy poacher. And you can poach eggs, which is a delicious way to do them. And you can poach them to the point where you, of course, don't make the yolk completely cook, right? The yolk is where the fat is. And when we oxidize or cook those yolks, we're oxidizing the cholesterol. And cholesterol is a really important thing for the body, but when it gets oxidized, it can cause problems in our vessels.
So that's why the over easy is better than scrambled, because I thought that's what.
Correct, and when you scramble them, you create even more of a problem in mixing the proteins of the white with the fat of the yolk. A lot of people get really sensitive to that. Now, when your gut is really healthy and you're eating really high quality eggs, like farm raised, generally scrambled shouldn't bug your gut too much. But a lot of people with leaky guts, with IBS, scrambled eggs will bug them. So if you're going to scramble, I mean, this is a great way to introduce veggies into your meal. So I would highly recommend that anytime you scramble or make a frittata or make a muffin tin, right? You could actually literally whisk all your eggs, chop all your veggies, mix them together and dump them in muffin tins. Then you could have little egg popovers for, a couple weeks just in your fridge. But you can make omelets, frittatas, scrambled eggs with veggies, right? Notice I'm not talking about cheese and bacon and sausage, right? We're de-emphasizing those things because I don't really consider that healthful on a regular basis. So some spices and some veggies, red bell pepper, mushroom, onion, spinach, kale. They are lovely with egg scrambles or just cooked on the side. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to quickly, just lightly steam a bed of spinach. I mean, this could take literally 60 seconds with a little ghee and some spices till it just starts to soften the spinach. Put it on a plate and throw your over easy eggs on top of it. That recipe takes about 5 minutes to make. It's a hot, healthy breakfast. Other ways to do eggs, I'll mention more for snacks / lunches and dinners, is hard boiling them. Hard boiling, again, usually takes about 10 minutes, and yeah, it's a process to peel the eggs, but if you really wanted to, you could hard boil a dozen eggs once a week or once every couple of weeks. Peel them in your fridge and keep them contained in a container, and they'll be good for the whole week. And you could grab at those, chop them into your salads, use them as a snack. It's a really nutritious way to get eggs in.
Is that as ideal? Because I've been kind of avoiding hard boiled only like special times, like we're traveling, let's do hard boiled egg. Because you want it more than liquid.
It's not ideal, but it's better, it's a pretty high quality protein fat combo. And a lot of times when we're looking for something healthy to grab or something, to put in a salad or another meal, it's a really convenient thing to have around.
It's better that than something else that might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's better than that than putting bacon crumbles in your salad or, something like that.
So because of the fragility of the egg, can you do it in the Instant Pot or not?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can cook eggs in the Instant Pot. It's just they're so quick to boil, but yeah, you can do it in the Instant Pot too.
They peel great though, after the Instant Pot,
They come right off.
It has, when you cook the egg and not break the yolk, it's hard boiling, you're not breaking the yolk.
Correct, that's
So
correct.
there's still a benefit to
There
hard
still
boiling.
is, yeah. I think it's superior to the scrambling element. Right. Okay. Another thing kind of egg related, I'm going to switch gears a little bit off of eggs, is the creation of, I call them nut breads or paleo breads. Right? People kind of think, well, I got to have bread with my food, and I don't know what I would do without bread. You know what? Nut breads are surprisingly delicious and wonderfully nutritious because they are fat and protein and a little bit of carb. So they're very filling, they're full of fiber, they're full of vitamins, and they're really easy to make actually. It involves using a nut flour like coconut or almond flour, mixing it with some other fiber, usually flax, maybe chia, and combining eggs as your binding agent and a couple of powders like baking powder and a little bit of olive oil maybe, or something like that, maybe a couple of spices if you want to tweak the flavor. And then you get it in a little loaf pan and you bake it for 25 minutes, that's done. And you have a big, dense piece of paleo or nut bread that'll last you a good week, or if it's a family, maybe you do a couple of them. It's really easy to make them. And again, recipes abound online as to how to make these, but it's a great thing to combine with soups, to combine with egg breakfast, or even to just, if you're in a pinch for a snack, I'm going to have a slice of paleo or almond bread with a slathering of clarified butter on it. So that's a great tool or a great thing to prepare. That does take a little time, maybe like 10 minutes of prep time if you have all the ingredients, but once you got it, you know, you have a big supply for a while. Yeah.
Can you buy this kind of clarified butter?
Yeah, you can buy clarified butter. It's here at Pilgrim's.
So, and what's the best kind?
They have it in the refrigerated section. They only have one kind. It's a really good brand here. It's just more pricey to buy it, but it's, you know, it still goes a long ways. So
It's so easy.
it's pretty easy to make
It's
that.
so easy.
Yeah. So another thing I want to mention is I actually really love doing tofu scrambles too. And this could be, you know, sometimes you could do breakfast for dinner, so this could go in different places. But taking tofu, mashing it all up, and putting in some ghee, and I really like using nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast, if we're getting around the whole cheese dairy thing, can be awesome because it tastes kind of cheesy, but it doesn't have any of the problems associated with dairy. So nutritional yeast in a tofu scramble can be really good. You can still put all your veggies in, but you're getting a really good vegetarian protein that way. Yeah.
Isn't tofu just as processed as all of the...
Tofu is a processed form of soy, but if you use it organic, you don't run into the GMO issue with it. And most of the, like, you know, meat replacement products are dramatically more processed than organic tofu, especially if you get like a sprouted tofu. And of course, your best soy product is probably tempeh. So tempeh is an awesome thing to cook with. I'm going to mention it a couple more times. But I think tofu, on occasion, is a totally fair thing to be eating.
But it's legume-based, because soy's a legume.
Correct, it's a legume. And I don't have problems with legumes. I think legumes are super healthy for people with, you know, guts that can digest them and want a really balanced diet. Now, that was the caveat, was if their gut can digest them, right? So we gotta sometimes work to get there. So other breakfast ideas that I wanna mention. Okay, so a lot of people like cereal, a lot of people like granola. You know, granola yogurt, granola milk. Okay. One of the things that's super easy to make, again, one-time investment in time, it takes some time, but paleo granola is amazing. You can get a bunch of different nuts and seeds, you can get some coconut flakes, you can coat it all in ghee and a little bit of honey, bake it in your oven on low heat, and you can get, you know, giant portions on 2 baking pans that'll last even a family weeks and weeks and weeks. And that can be your substitute for your super high sugar, high starch granolas and cereals that you're used to eating and taste delicious. So I really like paleo granola. I highly recommend kind of researching some recipes and giving it a try. Of course, what do you put with it? Ideally, because we're not using milk, we're using almond milk, we're using hemp milk. If we're using yogurt, we're going to use one of the nice ones from Pilgrim's, like the Bulgarian yogurt they have, which is not pasteurized and not added with sugar and actually has all the live cultures. So I think a little yogurt, once a week, twice a week would be totally fine and a great balanced breakfast if you want to do that with paleo granola and maybe a little fruit like berries.
So how do you feel about making your own yogurt in the Instant Pot?
Yeah, your own yogurt
It's
could go
so
to,
good.
yep, you could do your own yogurt. Again, my caveat there is not to overdo it, right? I don't think most people do well on yogurt every single day. I think it needs to be a interspersed type of ingredient in our diet. But if you use the right kind of yogurt, the Bulgarian kind or the homemade,
Raw milk?
yeah, that's the way to really do it if you're going to eat yogurt. Otherwise, it's pasteurized, right? You knock out all the live cultures, which is one of the most medicinal values of yogurt as a food. Okay. So, another way to just do something quick, nothing wrong with whole fruit salads, right? They're a little high on sugar, but especially in summertime when fruit's abundant, chopping up a few different fruits, maybe you toss some nuts in there to get a little protein and fat. That can be a really good meal on its own too. Similarly, juicing, right? A juicer, the tool that extracts all the fiber. I don't recommend juicing on a regular basis, but here and there you may want to say, hey, I'm going to kind of do a day where I don't eat until 2 p.m. or something. Maybe a little bit of fresh pressed juice to kind of tide you over till then could be a really good thing. And again, does everyone know what I mean by a juicer? Separates all the fiber, right? So it throws it out the back of the machine and concentrates the juice. I really like using juices in the context of like detoxing or people with really unhealthy guts that need passive nutrition you don't have to digest. But it also can serve as a spot here and there to kind of interject into a regular diet. What I would prefer, and this is my personal go-to, is the use of smoothies, which is where we use our blender. Remember I said one of the things blenders are really, really good at is making smoothies. And here's the advantage of the smoothies, is that it is super quick. You can make an incredibly nutritionally balanced smoothie in 5 minutes, and you don't even have to eat it then, right? You can throw a lid on it, and you can take it in the car, you can take it where you're going. Kids generally love smoothies. They almost always tend to work out well. And again, the better the blender you have, the more enjoyable the smoothie is, in my opinion. So the idea would be that to make a smoothie, you want to have a liquid base. So I would start with water or almond milk. Unsweetened is the key there. So unsweetened almond milk or water. And the thickness of the smoothie really depends on how much of that you put in. If you want it really thick, you do less water or almond milk. If you want it thin, more water or almond milk. Your taste base to your smoothie should be fruit, right? And I specifically like to recommend berries here because berries have the highest nutritional density of any fruit, and they have a low glycemic value. Of course, other fruits like apples, pears, things like peaches, nectarines, even pineapple, mango. I mean, you can use all of these. A little higher in sugar content as you go up the chain there. So you've got to be a little careful by overdoing those. So I would say 1 to 2 cups of fruit per person. And then add to that, I would even add more fiber. So I'd actually take ground flaxseed, ground chia. You can grind it up and keep it in your fridge so that you don't have to grind it each morning before you put in the smoothie. 2 tablespoons is not too much fiber to get in there. And there's all sorts of nutrients in flax and chia. They're kind of superfoods. And then in addition to that, go find a really clean pea protein. Pea or hemp are my preferred plant proteins, right? Not whey. Whey comes from cow dairy. Most people don't digest that cow dairy very well. So add the protein powder. Typically around 15 to 20 grams is a very adequate serving. And again, easily available. Try a couple of different ones out. If you really want to make it truly whole foods, you can do hemp hearts. That has a really great, rich protein source to it too. So you could put a few big scoops of hemp hearts in there. And then lastly, add the fat in. This is what a lot of people miss in smoothies. They forget about fat. Okay, so fat is really important. It's the satiating factor in food that we eat. It's what makes us feel satisfied and what burns really slowly. So we want a fat in that smoothie so we're not hungry in an hour later. My favorite fat to put in is avocado, because not only is it a great fiber and it's a great healthy fat, but it also makes a really great consistency to the smoothie. I would argue as a fruit, banana is the other thing that can really do that as well, but it's got a little bit higher sugar. So a whole avocado or a half an avocado, it's a big one, is a wonderful way to top off the smoothie and make it a really good blend. Now greens are awesome to put in, of course, so parsley, kale. I'm going to caution a little bit about spinach, because spinach has a lot of what are called phytates in it, which bind up a lot of the nutrients and can be pretty hard on the kidneys. So I would lean towards using things like kale and parsley and collards and beet greens and chard, Swiss chard. Those would be better choices if you're going to put greens in.
Spinach is okay when you're steaming it? Is that the
Yeah,
way you'd rather use
it breaks down all those kind of phytic acids. Yeah.
I love to put raw beet, just a hard beet in there.
Yeah, and if you have a Vitamix,
Yeah.
you can do that.
No, I have a cheap blender
Oh,
and
yeah?
it just does a great job.
Okay, well good.
With a raw beet,
Okay, yeah, that would be a nice ingredient. It's got some sweetness to it.
yeah.
Yeah. And you can play around with other veggies. I'm just kind of giving you a quick and dirty, fast, healthy, tasty recipe that you can make, that kids will like, that you can do day over day and probably not get tired of. And this can, by the way, be a snack. It can be a lunch replacement. I mean, it doesn't have to be for breakfast. I just put it in that section because it seems like a logical place to put it. So questions so far about our conversation?
Can you repeat about the spinach in the smoothie? What is what is
It has phytic acid in it and a lot of agents that essentially prevent nutrient absorption in its raw form, and also can contribute to the potential for kidney stones if you do a ton of it too often.
So if you have those power grains and spinach is in it, are you probably okay with, it has 3 different things in it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all about quantity. I don't think it's a bad thing in and of itself, but if you're putting 4 cups of spinach every day in your smoothie, you could get yourself into trouble.
It also, doesn't it take the calcium from our body, the finding, is it?
That's what I mean, it binds nutrients up, including
Yeah.
minerals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I learned from that
Nourishing traditions.
nourishing traditions, yeah.
Okay, so let's roll along to snacks. All right, someone had a question about that, so that's a really important one. I mean, again, one of the points I want to make is if you eat healthy fats in your main meals, if you put a lot of clarified butter, if you use a lot of olive oil, if you eat a lot of avocado in your meals, nuts and seeds, you're not going to need to snack as much. That's one of the things I learned profoundly when I learned about nutrition, was fat stays with you. So ideally, we're not eating all day long as humans. It's bad for our digestion. It's bad for our health maintenance to constantly be digesting. So my preference would be that we don't really need to snack much. And we're eating good fats in our meals to enable that. But if we do, some ideas to throw out there. So kale chips. People like crunchy, right? It's hard to find crunch in really healthy food. Well, I think kale chips are a great idea. Coating them in a little bit of clarified butter that you've heated, throwing your spices on it, a little garlic, a little salt and pepper, and baking them in the oven about 350 for 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how your oven bakes them. You can make a big batch of kale chips, and they're pretty tasty. And there's no starch in them, there's no inflammatory compounds, so it's a really great crunchy snack. The other thing, just in general, is having raw chopped veggies, even a store of them at the beginning of the week, is a really easy thing to do. Because they end up being very good vehicles to consume dips with, which I'll talk about in a minute. So My favorite vegetables there are celery, carrot, cucumber, red bell pepper, I would say broccoli, cauliflower, and I guess if we move into the fruit realm, I would also go with apples. These are wonderful things that you can prep either in advance or very, very quickly and have as a really nutrient-dense food to consume whatever it is, either on their own or with a dip, right? So that should be a really quick go-to for pretty much anybody. The dips I want to talk about, which I think again are great for snacks. One of them is making guacamole. So again, avocado, great fat. Add some spices, add some lime. You have a tremendously tasty dip to mix all of those other veggies I described. Particularly I like cucumber with guacamole. Another really good one is hummus. A lot of people are sensitive to garbanzo, so I'm a really big fan of white bean hummus. White bean hummus is super easy to make at home. Again, if you got your pressure cooker, make your white beans. Cannellini beans, great northern beans specifically. You're going to get your food processor out. This is where you need that food processor. Get your oils in there, get your spices in there, and you can make a delicious dip hummus that will last in the fridge 7 to 14 days if you have it in a nice cold fridge and sealed. Yeah, question?
Guacamole, hummus. I'm a fan of jalapenos. I mean,
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Spices, yeah, jalapeno is a great potential.
Okay, no, I've heard you talk about
some people,
peppers and...
some people are kind of sensitive to jalapenos, but no, I'm not going against using jalapenos at all. Yeah, yeah, that's a great thing to flavor with.
Okay. No,
Another dip I really like to make is artichoke heart dip. So you can actually, Costco has these big jar of artichoke hearts. I don't like the oil they put in them, so I drain off the oil and then take the artichoke hearts, dump them in a food processor, add olive oil as your primary oil that you're going to spin it up with, and some spices. Really great, healthy dip to make.
do you rinse them after you drain them?
I wouldn't rinse them. I wouldn't worry about it.
I'm starting to find where you can buy frozen artichokes, the ones that don't have, say, a vitamin C added in.
Yeah.
I can't find it, but people talk about that for a recipe. Frozen
Yeah, and
artichokes.
Trader Joe's makes frozen ones. I mean, there's a few places that have them, but yeah.
Okay.
So what do you put in the artichoke hearts after you drain them? What do you put?
Olive oil is the main oil to blend with. You don't need a ton usually, but yeah, and then some spices. Yep. Okay, so let's transition over into the nut and seed world, because for snacks, you can't beat nuts and seeds, right? I need to make a point about roasting nuts and seeds and soaking nuts and seeds and sprouting nuts and seeds. When you go to the store and you buy already roasted nuts and seeds, they've been roasted at a really high heat and it's made a lot of the oils kind of rancid. So ideally, you're actually buying raw nuts and seeds and soaking them or roasting them yourself. If you're soaking them, you can soak them overnight. That gets a lot of those phytic acids out. Nuts have a lot of phytic acids. You can also sprout them, which is a longer process, but it actually involves making them even more digestible. Or you can soak them and then roast them, which is probably ideal, in which you roast them at a very low heat. So I like roasting nuts and seeds at around 200 degrees for about an hour, hour and a half, flipping them once. And, you know, get creative about spices. I like to soak them in wheat-free tamari and then roast them. You can put salt, you can put various seasoning spices on them, but that's a really great way. Again, once you roast them, you can keep them in sealed jars and get them in the fridge, and they'll last for quite a long time. And even if they're out on the counter, as long as they're in the sealed jar, they'll last for a few weeks without going rancid. Yeah. What's that?
Could you repeat how you roast them?
Roast them at 200 degrees for about an hour and a half, flipping them maybe once. Yeah.
Key thing about our walnuts is I buy a 22-pound bag, and I put it in the freezer, and then I pull it out, but I don't really want to have to soak and roast, so I don't, but I know almonds you should, but I don't know
Almonds,
about
yeah.
walnuts.
Walnuts are maybe not quite as important, but generally speaking, it's best to roast them if you can.
I don't have to soak.
But if they're not whole, it doesn't really good. A walnut so seldom comes whole.
Right.
Yeah, these are halves, so.
Oh, okay.
So do I need to?
Yeah, I wouldn't be as focused on it with walnuts. That's the one that I might change my tune a little bit on.
What's the purpose of soaking them?
Soaking them breaks down a lot of those compounds that bind up the nutrients. If they're raw, a lot of the nutrients are bound up in those phytates.
Do you have a good source for raw nuts to buy or buy?
Well, I know Costco sells raw nuts, raw almonds now.
Yeah.
So that's a relatively cheap source. Otherwise, the bulk sections of the health food stores.
As
That's where
your
you-
standard too.
Yeah,
Yeah, Azure.
yeah, that's your standard.
So when you make your own nut butter, you need to soak the nuts first and dry them and roast them and then make the nut butter.
Ideally, they're cooked to some degree to break up some of those phytates.
Okay.
Or soaked, well. Yeah, even soaking them on their own would be probably sufficient, as long as you then dehydrate them after that.
Okay.
How long do you soak them? Nuts?
Overnight, 24 hours. Yeah.
In the water?
What's that?
In the water?
Yeah, in water.
Just water?
Yeah.
You said
plain water.
dehydrate them.
Well, you can dehydrate them in the oven at really low heat, or you can invest in
Dehydrate.
you can invest in a dehydrator.
Yeah.
So nut butters are a really convenient way to get the veggies or the fruit with the nuts. So that's one great snack food is just, apple with nut butter, celery with nut butter, various foods with nut butters. Really good way to consume nuts. Also just whole and mix them up, right? And maybe even toss a little bit of dried fruit in there. You can make your own trail mix. So a little bit of unsweetened cranberries or some dried cranberries or something like that. So I'm not going to say, again, chocolate and all these other things because those aren't really what we're after in this lecture. But nuts and seeds are such a great on-the-go, quick food that we would be really missing if we didn't hit on that pretty hard for snacking. Any questions about some of those concepts for snacks? Okay, I'm going to roll right along here because we're running low on time. Lunches, the things that I'm really going to focus on, remember my point I made about leftovers? To me, this is leftover central, is lunch. So when I get to dinners, a lot of those dinners doubles as lunch, right? But on a standalone basis, a lot of people are really hooked on sandwiches, right? And they're thinking, I got to have these 2 pieces of bread and whatever's in between them. When really, you don't need that. I find that collard greens and romaine lettuce make awesome wraps. Everything you put in your sandwich, you can put in romaine lettuce, or collard greens are actually my very favorite because they're a little more flexible and you can really get a lot in there. And then you start loading them up with the good stuff, right? Avocados, homemade mayo, different dips if you want to, cucumber, red bell pepper, sprouts, put a little bit of actual turkey or actual chicken, right? Not like processed lunch meat chicken and turkey, but actually cooking the turkey and peeling off all the meat and putting that in the sandwich. A couple slices of lamb in there. You could put chopped up hard-boiled eggs in there. You could put tempeh in there. You could put tofu in there. You could put beans in there. You could put bean dip in there, right? So all sorts of great things that you can make a wrap out of a vegetable versus getting all that bread in there. Okay. The other thing, which someone in the front just mentioned, is salads. Salads can be done really, really quickly. And the quickest way to get the lettuce part going is to obviously buy like either baby greens or pre-cut greens. I would argue the pre-cut greens have lost some of their nutrient value. So it's really best to buy it fresh, and the leafy kinds are the best kinds. So the more bound up it is, the less nutrients, right? So like iceberg lettuce has basically no nutrition in it. So red leaf lettuce, green leaf lettuce, arugula, spinach, all these bases for your salads, and then taking those bases and adding your different veggies to it. So all these ones we mentioned, cucumber, avocado, carrot, green onion, beets, you could put,
Radishes.
yeah, radish, you could put artichoke. I mean, sky's the limit in what fibrous veggies you want to put in.
Spinach again.
Yeah.
I like to throw spinach in my salad, but we have the same issue with the raw spinach
To a
there
degree, but
as
again,
with
that's
the
why
smoothie.
I recommend mixing up different types of green leafy veggies and not always doing spinach salads. Yeah. What do you get in there for protein? Okay, break up your nuts and seeds, really good in salads. Beans, awesome in salads. Hard-boiled eggs, awesome in salads. This is where I'm going to mention dairy, but very specific dairy. Sheep cheese in the form of sheep feta is awesome in salads. It's kind of one of my guilty pleasures, putting sheep feta in your salad. Sheep feta is not what they sell at Costco unless it's in the brine, okay? That's a company that's bought the name feta and has really cleverly marketed it as feta, but it's not real feta. It comes from cows. Real feta comes from sheep, and it's in a brine. They have it here. They actually, I think right now they're carrying it at Costco. It's kind of on and off.
Costco has a sheep feta.
Yeah, great. Awesome. So sheep feta is a great protein fat. It really gives your salads a good kick and a good kind of tart taste. You can put a little chopped up fruit, a little dried fruit. Don't go crazy with it, but chopped up, strawberry, a little bit of dried cranberry, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you could actually put real meat in too. I mean, you could break up some chicken, break up some turkey. That could be in a good salad too.
Fish, we've been putting canned
Yeah.
salmon in.
Fish could be great, and another, kind of salad you can make. You can make all sorts of salads, right? You can make beet salads, you can make cucumber salads, you can make tuna salads. I mean, there's different ways you can make salads. I'm going to just hit on the main one that I like to just generally be our staple, which is lettuce as the base. And then we get to dressing, right? So someone asked a question, what's good dressing? Not one that you buy from the store is my main answer, even from this kind of store, right? Because the quality of the oils and the preservatives that need to be put in them compromises the health value of that dressing. Right? So first of all the dairy ones are off the table, right? So our ranch and our Thousand Island, those, we're going to stay away from those, but ideally olive oil is the centerpiece in your dressing. I think the simplest recipe ever is equal parts olive oil, fresh lemon juice, and vinegar, apple cider vinegar. You can throw some spices like oregano, garlic powder, spices of your choice, and make a tremendous dressing.
If you're avoiding the vinegar, which we are.
Then olive oil and lemon is awesome too. Yeah. Yeah.
But equal parts olive oil, lemon juice,
This
and
is a bit.
apple cider vinegar.
I personally like to do a lot less vinegar because
Yeah.
I do throw some vinegar in my dressings, even though I don't do a lot of it. I find if I do a little, it doesn't bother me. So, yeah, I like having a little vinegar in there.
I thought you were big on flaxseed oil, because that's what we're putting on that, or.
Flaxseed oil is okay. It's hard not to get it rancid. It's a super fragile oil. So I really like olive oil.
So do you use balsamic or always apple cider?
You could use balsamic. Yeah, balsamic would be fine too. Other vinegars are okay. But yeah, I mean, that's really, and again, you can do all sorts of permutations of specialized dressings, but for sake of time, I'm going to leave it there as where we start. And you can carry that dressing around wherever with you, get a good container, and even if you went out to restaurants, I know that's a question, bring your own dressing, if you want to. If you don't want to just do, or just ask for olive oil, don't get their pre-made dressing or whatever. Yeah.
I was gonna say, with having to make a salad for my husband every morning, if I don't make one for me too, which I try to do both first thing in the morning, I don't end up eating it because I want to go back and make it for myself.
Yeah.
But on weekends, I don't have salads because
Super easy thing, super easy thing to make in the morning,
I eat
as long
French.
as you don't mix the the oil in
Yeah.
before. Everything can go in there.
Everything.
You could actually take all the ingredients for the salad and on the weekend, make them all, get them all in Tupperwares, and you have salads for the week done. I mean, so it just depends on how you want to plan things.
You can do it in a, speaking of Tupperware, a big fix and mix Tupperware bowl for the whole week.
Yeah.
And just dip out of it.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So that's a big go-to. It should be a central piece for everybody as a quick, healthy food to make, and especially in the summer months. Middle of winter, I'm more into the soups and stews and cooked foods, but summer, that's a great way to go. Okay, I'm gonna pivot on to dinner because we're running out of time. So basically, the foundational concept with dinner is veggies prepared in various ways, okay? So we talked about the raw already, we covered that with lunches. Let's go to the various ways of cooking veggies. The next least cooked is steamed. Ones that particularly do well steaming is broccoli and cauliflower. You can steam a head of broccoli in 5 minutes. And you do your head of broccoli with some homemade mayo or clarified butter and your protein. You can have a super healthy meal in under 10 minutes, especially if you've already made the protein. Although you could cook up a salmon patty or a turkey patty really quickly on your skillet too. So steaming is a great way to make veggies. You can steam spinach, you can steam broccoli, cauliflower, green beans. The less you steam them, the more nutrient density stays in the vegetable and the less ends up coloring the water that you throw out. Right? The water that gets colored, that's the nutrients in there that you're dumping. So the lighter you steam things, the better. Another really good way to do fibrous veggies is sauteing. And this is where I get to this concept of stir fries. And again, sky's the limit in the diversity of the types of ingredients in the stir fries, what you put in them, what flavoring you use. But stir frying vegetables is an awesome way to make a meal. Yeah.
Are water chestnuts considered okay to eat in those?
Sure. Yeah.
And bamboo?
They'd be fine, yeah. Think about stir frying, you want to go kind of like we talked about shelf life for vegetables, right? Root vegetables last the longest. Root vegetables should go in your stir fry first. So you get your garlic and your onions in there first, and you get your carrots in there first, and if you're using squash, your squash in there, your beets. Then you migrate to the above ground plants like your broccoli and your cauliflower and your zucchini and maybe your, you could use Brussels sprouts. Then you move on to your leafy greens, your lettuce, your Swiss chard, your spinach, your kale, those types of things. So that's kind of the order you want to progress in. And again, you want to make your base be a good ghee, right? A high heat cooking oil. So that's a really good go-to. And then in the mix of all that, adding in your protein, right? So it could be ground turkey or it could be ground beef, but it also can be tempeh, or it also can be chopping up some almonds and walnuts and putting them in there. It also could be a little bit of tofu. It also could be beans. You can always mix beans into your stir fries. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. But that's a really good foundational dinner to rotate in. Again, it might take that one time to make that with the prep. It may take you an hour. But again, if you do it with leftovers, now you got some extra meals there. Same thing goes for the next thing, which is soups. Soups are great because you can make the ultimate leftovers. You can actually freeze them, and you can make giant quantities of soup depending on how big your pot is. So again, we touched on bone broth already. That should be serving as this enriching base that gets your fats into it already. And then adding into the soup veggies of your choice and play around with which ones work well for you. Spices, right? Get your spices in there, get your protein in there. Again, beans. I love doing lentil soups. I love doing various bean soups. I really like mixing in meats and cooking them for a good long while, and then getting all your veggies in there. You don't need to have a bunch of grains to enjoy that, right? I should make a quick stopping point on grains, right? We were talking about making stir fries or different maybe salads you can make. Really good grains to combine with stir fries or even dump a little bit in your soups if you're going to use them is quinoa and whole grain rice or brown rice and wild rice. Those are probably my favorite go-tos. You can make larger quantities that keep for a while. They'll keep at least a week. Again, so if you want to make a little stock and have a little grain to complement your veggies, and I really would think of it that way, as the grain complementing the veggies, not the veggies complementing the grain. Those are totally viable ways to do that.
What was the third one you said? Quinoa, wild rice, and?
And brown rice. Yeah.
You could add millet in there too.
Yeah, millet would be a good one. Millet, amaranth, those are ones that can be used as well. So then, your soups, again, pretty straightforward. And the nice thing that after you make that soup, if you freeze it, it will taste basically as good as when you just had it fresh. So I really like the concept of making giant soups, and you can pull them out months later when it's like, I didn't cook this weekend, but I really want some healthy food. There you have a soup waiting for you, and it's quick and easy. Okay. Questions so far? We're almost done.
The crock pot, use the crock pot.
Yeah, crock pots are a great way to make soups too. You can slow cook things, and all you have to do is the prep, and then you just leave it. It's a very good way to do it. A couple of my favorite grain replacements are spiralized zucchini and spaghetti squash. So play around with baking spaghetti squash and using that as your base for your stir fries or your other dishes that can work as a grain replacement. It's pretty delicious. And also wanted to mention, as a protein complement, I said I was going to de-emphasize meat. I'm going to emphasize fish, especially fatty fish like sardines and salmon, but also cod is a really good one. There's all sorts of fish out there. Halibut's a fairly good one. So go play around with different fish and find ones that you like. I'd be a little careful with like tuna and ahi because of the mercury content. I would do that rarely, but otherwise there's a lot of good fish available.
Are there certain types of salmon that you should stay away from?
Wild salmon is the preferred choice, right? So wild caught with fish is really what you're after. Yeah. Okay. So last but not least, if you really got a sweet tooth and you just can't go without satisfying that, a couple ideas. One is a really good 72% plus square of dark chocolate can be pretty satisfying. And so, it's dose and frequency dependent, right? A whole bar of dark chocolate, not such a good idea, right? But a couple of squares, 1 or 2 squares, probably totally safe and reasonable. Additionally, whole fruit, right? Berries, apples, half of an apple, half of a grapefruit, after dinner. If you really have that sweet tooth and you need something to kind of satisfy that craving, really good way to go where you get all the nutrients and fiber with it. If you had a low protein dinner or low fat dinner, maybe you do the apple with the nut butter. That could be an option too. Another really good it can substitute as a snack but also as a dessert is I call them fat bombs, but it's basically the mixture of almond butter with some ground chia or flax and a little bit of honey, honey to taste, but ideally not a ton of honey. Getting your hands nice and dirty and mixing all that up and turning them into balls. You can add a little coconut oil for even extra fat in it, but it's a really satisfying kind of sweet treat that's a little more savory and filling. So that can be, easy thing to make.
How do you store those?
Just in the fridge. Yep. And again, you can really get into paleo dessert recipes. My take-home message is we really ideally aren't doing dessert. We have separated ourselves from the kind of enslavement to the sugar and the taste of sweetness on our tongue. But if you need some things, those I think are probably some of the best choices.
I asked my husband the other day, where's the rest of those dates? they've kind of gotten dried up, and there weren't very many left as I ate them.
Yeah, and dates are a really
Mental-
concentrated sugar, right? So, I mean, a couple of dates, but you know, when you get into handfuls of dates, you're putting a lot of sugar.
Stuff
in
an
your body.
almond in there, walnut, I make it, there you go, but when they're gone, you want something.
Yeah, you could use dates potentially. It's better than eating
Eggs.
processed sugar.
Yeah.
I haven't heard you mention oranges.
A lot of people react to oranges, so I'm not a huge fan of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a way bigger fan of grapefruit, which has a lot less sugar in it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of our whirlwind tour of quick nutrition. I'm hoping people got some of the things they were looking for. Before I wrap it up and launch into our questions here, are there any kind of parting questions that the class has?
I've heard a lot about phytic acid in tomato seeds.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Well, tomatoes have a lot of lectins in them. It's one of those foods that a lot of people are sensitive to. So you guys didn't hear me talk about tomatoes a lot today because a lot of people are sensitive to them, and I generally don't like to use them as like the base of soups and of meals. And so, yeah, they have some phytic acid, they have a lot of lectins in them. A lot of people react to them. They're part of the nightshade family: tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant. And so generally I don't mention them prominently, even though tomatoes and potatoes are probably the most commonly consumed vegetables, which is, they taste good, and I totally get how that sucks if you're trying to avoid them, but I find a lot of people to be sensitive to them. Sweet potato much less so than potato in terms of what people react to. And again, we can get a lot more personal about this whole conversation. That's kind of what we do in my clinic, is we talk on a very individual level, what is the right nutrition for you based on your design and based on your overarching health and gut health. How do we apply that and approach that? But I hope this covers most bases for the broadest diversity of people out there, and maybe gave you some ideas of how to navigate some of this.
You did really good.
Thanks.
Yes.
So whoever needs to leave right now, you're welcome to. Thank you for coming. There's some info about our clinic in the back. I'm going to stick around after I go over these to just chat with people if they want to, but I'm going to kind of move into the answering of these questions now. So thanks for coming in if you need to take off. There was a blood pressure treatment question. So the way that I want to approach that is there's a lot of different forms of high blood pressure and what causes it. So the treatment is kind of going to depend on what causes it. But I'm going to focus on the main prominent couple of things, which is obesity and stress. So the two primary treatments in my book is, and I should say inflammation goes in that category too. Inflammation, obesity, and stress. So the primary goals of treating high blood pressure: reduce inflammation, reduce weight, and or reduce stress. So definitely a lot of my work in treating those conditions goes at targeting strategies to optimize that physiological function. Those are the root causes, and as a naturopath, I'm always interested in finding the root cause. So for some people that might take a long time. If they're carrying an extra 100 pounds of weight, it may take us a couple of years to get someone off of their blood pressure meds, but we can do it. If someone battles a lot of chronic stress and fight or flight, we may need to really work on how that person reacts to the forces in their life and really devise strategies of how they can transform stress and that reactivity to it. If we've done all those things and still someone that has high blood pressure, or we're trying to get it down while we're doing all those things, then I really like magnesium and potassium as minerals. They're incredible for lowering blood pressure. I really like parsley, I really like celery as a plant-based way to lower blood pressure. I also really like a formula called Carditone that has a plant in it called Rauwolfia that you have to be very careful with because it's a low-dose herb, but for some people it does a great job of lowering blood pressure. So that's one of my main go-to compounds. Yeah.
When you say parsley and celery, like how much daily, I mean?
Couple sticks of celery every single day,
Okay.
for sure. Celery, parsley, I mean, you know, put condiment on your food. You don't need to do tons of it. A way to concentrate that is to juice it.
So would that be reducing the inflammation?
Yeah,
Is that what
those
it
would
is?
also reduce inflammation, but specifically they've been researched to lower blood pressure scientifically. A couple of really good teas to use, Tilia or Linden, hawthorn tea is wonderful, great at lowering blood pressure, hibiscus, great at lowering blood pressure. So a couple of things to toss out there. Pre-diabetes, there was a question about that, right? Okay. So pre-diabetes, this is, you know, the epidemic, you know, process of our culture and society. It has an issue to do essentially with our body's ability to metabolize starches and sugars and carbohydrates. That is the underlying causative force, that and a sedentary lifestyle, which means that we're not having the cells demand those carbohydrates in order to pull them out of the bloodstream. So what's really going on there is carbohydrates and sugars are being stuck in the bloodstream because they're not able to get into the cell, and this signal called insulin is no longer sufficient to drive the sugar from the bloodstream to the cell. It's also called insulin resistance. Over time, that gets so bad that the blood sugar rises, and eventually the pancreas, which makes insulin, gives out altogether, and then we become insulin dependent, meaning we have to inject insulin to normalize our blood sugar. I would argue that diabetes is 100% reversible and treatable with nutrition and exercise. We won't talk much about exercise, although we can get more specific about the type of exercise. Generally, we want interval training or high intensity intervals is probably the best. But the big focus here is on carbohydrates in the diet, whether that's sugars, whether that's processed foods, whether that's grains, whether that's concentrated sources like juices and alcohol. But those are all the things that cause it. It's eliminating high glycemic foods from the diet, eating more vegetables, eating more fiber, eating more fat, which cannot be converted into sugar.
Now, the only juice that I drink, other than juice, you know, vegetables juiced, is apple juice. Just regular apple, I mean...
Tons of sugar in it.
From the apple, not added?
Way too much sugar in it for someone who has prediabetes. Yeah. So basically it's a grain-free, no processed food approach and no added sweeteners. So, and again, if it's prediabetes, that alone can turn it around pretty well. If it's more advanced, we have to get even more restrictive. Post-meal runny noses. So this is almost always a food reaction. 99% of the time, I'd say. The way to test for that, the gold standard is to do an elimination diet. Take all the highly inflammatory, highly allergenic foods out of your diet for about a month. And then probably what you'll find is your runny nose goes away. To find out what the culprit is, add one back in at a time every couple of days, noting, does the runny nose come back? And when it does, you probably hit on some of the foods that are causing the problem. The key here with chronically runny noses is you have to get the inflammatory foods out of your system for at least a month. You can't stop eating cheese for 2 days and say, oh, well, it's still runny nose, can't be dairy, right? You really have to take the food out for an entire month to actually clear it from your system. So pretty straight up, you know, again, 99% of the time, if it's very oriented towards post-meals, then we're looking at a food reaction that's happening.
So what foods do you take out?
What foods would I focus on?
Daily.
The highest allergens would be cow dairy, wheat, potato, corn, tomato. Those are probably the ones I would start with. And, you know, just processed food in general, but those would be the big food groups that would be my most suspicious.
I had the whole runny nose thing after meals, and with the pre-diabetes, I cut out breads, pastas, as much sugar as I could, and it is greatly reduced.
Right.
What, I mean,
And
every
that's
now
what
and
I mean.
then, but not like I used to have.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, is that processed food is certainly
Yeah.
a big component, that almost all processed food inevitably has potato, corn, wheat in it anyways.
I kind of know where you're at with supplements,
Yeah.
but with the pre-diabetes,
Oh,
I
yeah,
understand
sorry.
that
Yeah.
like cinnamon is
Yeah.
a good, a cinnamon supplement.
Yeah.
Is that
My favorite is berberine. I really like what berberine does to blood sugar. It really drops it nicely. I really like gymnema, which is another plant. I really like, cinnamon is good too. And there are some other great herbs. I use formulas usually, which is probably why I didn't directly address that part. I use a blood sugar support formula from Vital Nutrients that I really like. Several companies make good formulas.